While retirement is generally seen as a time of relaxation and self-focus, God calls us to love, serve, and help others for a lifetime. He has been preparing us for this retirement season, literally our entire lives. In retirement, countless Christians enter a state of spiritual dormancy, not knowing how they are called to have an impact for God's kingdom. The Retirement Reformation seeks to encourage and empower the 50 million Christians approaching or in retirement to embrace the calling God has been preparing in them. When the world says it's time to stop, you can begin to have your greatest impact. Welcome to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, where our goal is to journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him.
Reaching out to the 50 million Christ followers in America who are approaching or already in retirement. You've tuned into iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, along with the founder of the Retirement Reformation, Bruce Bruinsma. Check us out online, retirementreformation.org, retirementreformation.org. Wasn't it the Seven Dwarves who sung, Heigh-ho, Heigh-ho, it's home from work we go? But really, why do we leave our homes, our places of rest and relaxation? Why do we go to work? Well, most of us go because we love to work. Work gives us purpose. Work pays for things we love. Work provides for our family. But now you're thinking, I have a different perspective on my work. I'm over 60, and work has taken on a whole new role in my life. Welcome to iRetire4Him, as today Bruce Bruinsma and I venture out on week 2 of 3 in a series on working after 60. Last week we talked about having to work. This week we'll cover wanting to work, and next week we'll cover volunteering. Since we all know that retirement isn't biblical, we hope this conversation helps you determine best how to serve your local community in the years following 60. Bruce Bruinsma, welcome back to iRetire4Him.
Jim, it's good to be here. And in this middle segment of the 3 that we're doing, hopefully will be as impactful as that first one was. And I'm anxious as we jump into this conversation.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, especially that middle segment on the last podcast with Dr. Sharon Ford talking about, what was that? Exercising our muscle of advocacy. That's going to be great. That's the show. If you missed last week, show number 63 of iRetire4Him, make sure you go back and listen to that. All right, Bruce, since choosing to work is different than having to work, but it all means we have to leave our home to do that work, what's the difference between having to work and wanting to work?
I think the underlying assumption in that question is that there is a significant difference, and that one is harder or more painful or less pleasurable, and the other one is less painful and more pleasurable because you're making that decision. Now, I think one of the questions that it'd be worthwhile us discussing, does it have to be that way? And I think last week we touched on some of that. But perhaps it's worth now, does it have to be that way? And does it, I have to go to work, is the pain and the struggle and the depression and the, oh my gosh, do I have to get up today? I don't think it has to be that way, but I think for many people it is. And yet, when in fact we don't have to, but yet choose to, there is an easier access to joy along with some freedom.
It's that level of intentionality, whether we have to work or whether we are wanting to work, that level of intentionality to know that God gave us that ability to work as a gift. And that when we work, we have the opportunity to glorify our Father in heaven and to expand the kingdom right here on earth. What are some of the things that your friends give it as examples for why they are choosing to work well past retirement age?
And I'll speak for myself first.
Okay, do that.
Is that, it's simply that God has put into my heart and the hearts of many a passion for a subject or a need or an issue that He has uniquely prepared us to speak into, to journey along with, to engage with. And it is that passion that gets us up in the morning, even though our knees hurt and it takes a little bit longer to get to that first cup of coffee. But it's an issue of the passion that He has put in us for a given set of circumstances or an issue. That's one.
All right, so you go to church. You're in a small group full of people that are, some are retired, some are not retired. Some are back to work, some are not back to work. How many of your friends have retired and stopped working and then said, you know what? I'm going back to work. I need to work. I want to work. How many of them? You got one example of a friend that said, nope, I'm going back.
Well, it's interesting. If we had this conversation, let's say 5 years ago, I would have said, nah, I don't think I know very many have said that. Now that's changing. And it's changing for two reasons. Number one, the realization that nothing is not very meaningful. And so doing nothing doesn't bring meaning and value. And so then about 5 or 6 of my friends have looked back and said, where did I get the most joy in my activity? And it was actually in my job, my work that I did, or work that now I've discovered that I can do. And so it's there are more people going back to work who don't have to, but choose to.
Well, and those people, all their wives got together, all your buddies, their wives got together and said, please, will you encourage my husband to go back to work? He's driving me crazy.
There is certainly, there's that. As a matter of fact, I'll be doing a workshop on this coming Saturday that a good portion of it deals with that issue of creating new relationships in these new time frames, in these new circumstances.
Yeah.
And that has a lot of complexity to it. And sometimes just simply getting out of the house. Now, we were with a group of friends the other night, and in one of the conversations, the wife said, I can't tell you how excited I am. And the gentleman's name is Jim, happens to be. He said, I am so happy that Jim has found something other than golf that he can apply himself to, where he's making a difference in the lives of others, and he's getting out of the house about 9:30 in the morning.
And that story could be repeated probably 40 million times over. I think way too many retirement age people are leaving the workforce. Bruce, this is from my perspective, and I'm not quite there yet. I'm in my mid-50s. And what I've seen is what happens to companies when the wisdom vault is left open and spills out the front door when people retire. What are people who are running these organizations thinking, letting people retire? I mean, I would bet most of those people would take, a lot of times people get forced out because they make too much money. I would bet they'd take a reduced salary just to stay. And how much better would the organization be if those chronologically superior people would stick around with their wisdom? What kind of impacts have you seen in your experience where you've seen a lot of exit of people over 60 leaving, and how much it damages companies?
Well, I can think of 3 different companies right now. I won't name them, but where the exodus over the last probably 5 years has just hurt them both, their financially, their bottom line, the relationships with customers, the understanding of the marketplace and what needs yet to be fulfilled. Those are all gone, and they're having to recreate themselves from scratch without any of that benefit. Now, we also we have a private equity fund, so we invest in new startup companies. 3 of those companies, as intentionally part of it, are bringing on staff people that are over 65 and bring them on as mentors to their young staff as they're developing these new fantastic products. I think that's just really fantastic. And
there's opportunities like that everywhere. There are 10 million jobs out there and available. And if you want to work, you could pick and choose. Maybe you don't want to go where you have been for the last 20 or 30 or 40 years, but there's a place for you, and your wisdom is desperately needed. As somebody working over 60, there ain't nobody who's 20 who knows what you know. You're listening to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. We'll be right back with our second segment with our special guest, Ron Henry. Hang on for just a minute.
The Retirement Reformation wants to come alongside you as you navigate in each stage of your retirement. Our online resources include our blog, our downloadable books, and life planning studies, as well as membership and coaching options. Go to retirementreformation.org and use these resources to begin the transformation of your retirement. Journey from retirement to reformation, so you can say, I retire for Him. That's retirementreformation.org. Now, back to the show.
Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him. As we jump into segment 2, Bruce, every segment 2, we always highlight the story of somebody living out their faith in their quote-unquote retirement years. Who do you have for us today, Bruce?
Well, it's just a pleasure to have Ron Henry with us today, and Ron is a special case. But I'm going to start off with just a really simple question for you, Ron. Why aren't you retired?
Well, I think there's a key element here that I realized in my background more than anything else, is that when I got saved later in life, I learned it was about a relationship, not a to-do list. And I really expanded that, and I realized that life is not a formula. And I looked around myself, and life is a relationship. And then God brought an amazing gentleman into my life back in the mid-90s, and who just breathed life in me until he passed at age 90 when he finished writing his 92nd book on leadership about the idea of finishing strong. And here's a man who the last 3 books he wrote and dictated to his assistant because he had macular degeneration. So he was driven in that capacity. Yes, physically he couldn't do. So he had a bad hip, and he traveled to 88 countries with this bad hip because it was a basketball injury. But I mean, I'm not going to. His name is not necessarily something to promote here. But the point is, I had someone come into my life and said, "It's something out there that's far bigger," and they pointed me to a target that was something far bigger, which was eternity and a relationship. So I remember I was 30 years in executive search, and I remember I was meeting a number of the executives in their 40s and 50s, and they'd be so out of sync, and I would say to them, yeah, you climbed the ladder of success, but you got to the top of the ladder and realized it was leaning against the wrong building. The formula you followed, and you looked behind you, and it was the marriage that was in shambles, the kids didn't know you, your health was terrible, you had heart disease at age 50. I mean, you were a mess. And so the issue to me in this whole concept of finishing your work, what are you basing the formula on? The formula is a relationship with someone who's walking with me every day, cares more about me, cares more about my wife, cares more about my family, my grandkids than anyone else. And I just got to follow, and just pay attention and follow directions. I work for Him. So how can I retire if I work for God? How can someone retire working for God? I mean, I've never had anyone answer that question yet. So, I mean, God's, we sort of been around for a while.
In the Retirement Reformation, we say that we're called to be faithful for a lifetime. And that if we are not faithful and we are not entering into that relationship and being guided by it, as you talked about, that in fact now it's time to go to eternity because there's nothing more. Yet God has that plan for you. So how in the world did he then guide you to Marketplace Chaplains, which is doing such fantastic work, and we're so pleased to be affiliated. But tell me a little bit more about that transition into the work of Marketplace Chaplains.
Well, I think to me, I've learned, and once again, because I dealt with people, I do a lot of career advisory work, that I realized that the whole function is all about positioning. God already has my next assignment set up, but if I'm not positioned to receive it, whether it be spiritually, emotionally, or physically, He's not going to give me something that I'm not going to recognize. So I understood the positioning was first and foremost the most critical need of that. And also I recognized, I read a book that really influenced me a lot by John Eldridge called God the Father. And he wrote it in 2010. And he started talking about the seasons of life. And it just all of a sudden, he put a name to something that I knew of, which is a sage season. And then it dawned on me, everybody, there's not an exception, that moves sometimes into their 60s when they leave a king generation. they get greater joy out of life coming alongside someone and helping them be successful than actually being the one responsible. They didn't want the headache of payroll. They didn't want the headache of hiring and firing, but they want to help people and glean back and give back. So when Eldridge articulated that, just goes, wow, that makes sense, because all these executive guys that had come to in the search business going, oh, they won't hire me, I'm not marketable. And I kept saying, why would anybody hire you? You know too much, but you have great value. And then the more and more has been shared about that, and I've now experienced it. I mean, what a powerful season I'm in life. I can actually help people navigate through courses that I actually experienced over the last 50 years. And maybe even get them to understand, many of these people will do far greater than myself because they now have someone that's working with them. And I don't have to, and I'm not there to tell them anything. I'm just there to listen. I mean, if I learned that lesson early on, my marriage would be better if I learned how to listen better. So
your wife,
so all of our wives would probably affirm that.
Your wife called Ron. She's appreciating the work that you are making. She knows that there's progress still to be made.
Well, I'm sure that's it. Of course, she now has me have a hearing aid just to make sure I hear her. So that's something else.
And does she have the dial? I
don't even go there. I don't let her hear Bluetooth. I don't let her Bluetooth.
That's great. Jim, do you have a question for Ron?
Ron, what I love the fact you're past 60 and you're working and you're loving it. In fact, you started working for the chaplains after retirement age, didn't you?
Well, the interesting how God's perfect plan and positioning, and I didn't actually answer your question directly, is when I wound down my second search firm about 7 years ago, I had been praying to God. I said, how can I really impact and use what you've given me? All right. And because I never sold a big company for millions of dollars. So revenue was still something important to, live a certain lifestyle. And so I kept praying with the help. And meanwhile, I remember meeting Jason Brown, who I've been an encourager in his life for a number of years as he was there. And I'm familiar with marketplace chaplains. And he approached me at a conference. He goes, hey, you're a great recruiter. I'm looking for somebody to help on the marketing team on the West Coast. Do you know anybody? I'm thinking, sure. I've been doing this for years. I'm sure I can come up with somebody. And I said, do you pay for this position? He goes, yeah, we actually pay. And I go, wow, that's kind of cool. So I remember going back to my room and telling my wife, I said, honey, I just had an interesting request. And, Jason asked me to do this. And she looked at me and goes, isn't that what you do? Yeah, wow, okay. I mean, I wasn't looking for anything. I was positioned well, and I was positioned there to serve. And all of a sudden it came to me, and I went back to Jason. I'm going, well, I don't know if I can commit 100% of my time, but maybe 80% is listening. He goes, 80% of your time is worth 150% to anyone else with your experience and working with business owners and opening up markets. And that started over 6.5 years ago. So, I mean, what greater joy do I have than just bringing God's love and bringing Jesus to the workers at this season of life and just helping people. So,
and let's talk about that.
My wife said now, she goes, well, you'd do what you'd be doing if they didn't pay you, wouldn't you? I go, well, probably.
Yeah.
Well, that's the beauty of wanting to work. You are working in a sweet spot and you love what you do. And there's so many people listening to this podcast today, Ron, that need to know about marketplace chaplains because it is work that they would love to do too. Just pouring their lives into another generation of workplace beings. All people created in the image of God, not all of them believers, obviously, but people could check out Marketplace Chaplains online at mchapusa.org, mchapusa.com. It's actually both of them. Okay, .com. Okay. mchapusa.com, excuse me. Ron, who would be perfect to call you and connect with you about becoming a Marketplace Chaplain?
Anyone who has a heart to care and wants to find an additional purpose to their life. And remember that I think part of the terminology for the people in the so-called season we're talking about is to work on your vocabulary. Work on your vocabulary because God gives us assignments. So at this season of life, it's not a job. Can you say the word job and be encouraged? I don't think you can say the word would be, but if you said, I have an assignment from God, the Blues Brothers got it right. Back in the movie.
We're on an assignment from God.
So the point being is if you're in this season and you're saying, I want to do something that's really impactful, but I don't want to work 40 hours. I don't want to put 40 hours a week in, but I want to leverage something I really enjoy and really give back. That's chaplaincy. That's, just imagine as a person, you'll be able to walk into a company and be an encouragement to people, guide them and direct them. We provide all the training you need. You just have to have the right heart. And you actually get paid for it too. So that's not a bad thing.
And in the next 10 years, there's a need for over 100,000 workplace, marketplace chaplains. mchapusa.com. That's me prophesying, Ron, just so you know. mchapusa.com. Ron Henry, thanks for being on I Retire for Him today.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you for allowing me to be here. Thank you, Bruce.
And hopefully this message will reach some percentage of those that will then make a difference. So thanks for what you do.
I pray that it does. It'll give them 10 more good years of their life.
Yeah, it's amazing pouring your life into others. You're listening to I Retire for Him, and we'll be right back. Every I Retire for Him show goes so quickly we don't often get to remind you that there are 2 resources you should be checking out right now. I recommend that you get a copy of the Retirement Reformation book and the I Retire for Him book. Retirement Reformation focuses on the mindset and behavioral changes needed, let's just say paradigm shifting, that is needed to live out your faith in retirement. I Retire for Him is focused on many of the ways you can put your faith into action by investing your life into others in your retirement years. Get both at the Retirement Reformation website in the bookstore, retirementreformation.org. That's retirementreformation.org. Hey, welcome back to I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation, as we're talking about working past 60. Having to work was last time. This time is wanting to work. Bruce, in today's weird economic times, with low unemployment, high inflation, and monstrous job opportunities, some of our friends who choose to continue working into retirement choose to change their jobs, choose to change their career path, choose to change their industry. Why?
Well, first of all, I think because there are opportunities. Secondly, there is, and as our guests that we just completed our conversation with Ron Henry, he talked about being positioned for something unique. And so it's the positioning, it's not the position. And that God will then direct that positioning. And those opportunities then will come up. People ask me, well, what kind of a job should I do? And my answer is, what has He prepared you to do? They go, well, I'm not sure. I said, here's the action plan. Take a step forward and then listen for His guidance, and He will direct your paths.
Well, you've got a 4-part book series that could also help lead them through that conversation. Really, if you're not sure what God has prepared you to do, it's time for some quiet time. And no better thing to do than to be some quiet time with Bruce's 4 books in your hands, one at a time, charting your course to figure out what God's got for you in retirement. Check those books out online at retirementreformation.org under the resource tab. All right, Bruce, but isn't it tough to change jobs after 60? I mean, we're kind of set in our ways, and can we even learn? Can you teach an old dog new tricks?
I always think of my friend Moses. Here he was, age 80.
Your age?
Yeah, exactly my age. And God shows up in this burning bush and says, man, I'm going to do 180 degrees on your life, and watch out what's coming. Now, remember, he had a family. It was grown. He'd escaped from Egypt. He was raised by all the stuff that you know about Moses. And here it is at 80, and God's saying, you got a right-hand turn right ahead of you, brother. And he's got 40 years that will impact the world forever. And so Moses hesitated, however. He said, gee, I'm not sure I can do that. I'm not a very good speaker. And he had a bunch of excuses, just like the rest of us make. But when we put ourselves into God's hands and He opens doors and we step into them, He guarantees that He will provide us both the energy, the intentionality, and the application of experiences to be able to apply them. And so that's all good sounding, but there's just a lot of people that are just flat scared. Oh. And they need to stand up and take a step forward.
Well, and I think Moses was scared to death. He begged God, please, just make somebody else do this. I can't talk. And yet Moses got for the first 40 years, he was spoiled to death. The next 40 years, he's hanging out with sheep in the desert. And the next 40 years, he's hanging out with people's sheep in the desert for 40 years.
Yeah, that's right.
But but in that last 40 years, he was closer to God than anybody else has ever been on the planet because he spent face-to-face time with God. And that's really how rich our last phase of life is. We get that opportunity to be a little quieter, to hear the voice of God. We've had the wisdom under our belts to not make some of those same mistakes over again. And we can learn new things. It may take some technology expertise, but we've all got kids or grandkids or the neighbor's kids that can help us out with our iPhones.
If you don't know something about the technology, just ask your 5-year-old grandchild.
That's right.
He'll square you away in about a minute and a half.
Bruce, did you make any major career changes after 60?
No, I made career additions, not career changes, career additions. And that's kind of a different way to think about it. I've been the CEO of Envoy Financial for 30 plus years. But being a farmer in Laos, my wife always reminds me she didn't intend to marry a farmer, having a coffee plantation there. The ministries that we've done in 60 different foreign countries. The development of the Retirement Reformation. And so in my case, it's been an addition to, not a replacement of.
And that opportunity is there for everybody. We don't have to do what we have been doing. Some of us have to work because we need the income. But God's got work specifically designed for you in these years after 60. And it's not just playing golf, playing tennis, playing pickleball, or finding seashells. It's work of investing your life into other people with the wisdom that you have. Because if you're working after 60, you got 60 years of experience that those youngsters don't have. And many of the youngsters that you're working alongside don't have access to grandparents. Some of them don't have access to parents. It's so important pouring your life in others. Bruce, one final question before we talk about how the Retirement Reformation can help us with all this. What are some of the factors we should consider when changing our jobs but choosing to work?
I think the key is does it fit does it fit our passion, the position that God has put us in, all of our experiences? That's one. The second one, does it fit the circumstance of your family and your time? Does it fit into the rhythm of this new stage of life with your spouse, with your children, with your grandchildren? So is it in conflict with that, or is it part of that process? So I think those are two really key variables.
Very, very cool. And I would just encourage, add to that is choose a place that it fits your passion for life, and choose a place where there are people there that you can pour your life into. And because you have so much to offer. Bruce, how can the Retirement Reformation help our friends who are choosing to work, but doing it with a new level of intentionality?
First of all, I think it's having a better understanding of who God has created us to be and the trajectory of life that He has created us to have. My experience, and I think the message of the Retirement Reformation and the resources that are there and available for you. Matter of fact, we're releasing next week the Rethinking Retirement, which is an 11-week small group series for people to be able to understand how God has prepared them for this next stage and to open up their thinking about what the options and alternatives are. I'm always surprised at a new circumstance that I'm faced with, and I go, gee, I don't know anything about that. And then I think back, 30 years ago, something happened that informed me, that allows me to be able to step into this situation, that if that experience of 30 years ago hadn't happened, I wouldn't be ready. And so God, He knows.
Yes, He does.
And to trust that He knows.
No wiser words could be spoken. Bruce, great conversation on working after 60, choosing to work. Next time we come back, we're going to talk about volunteering. Thanks, Bruce. Appreciate the conversation.
God bless, my friend.
You've been listening to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, online at retirementreformation.org. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, and of course, we've had Bruce Bruinsma, the founder of the Retirement Reformation, with us. We're Christ followers journeying from retirement to reformation so we can ultimately say, I retire for Him.
I retire for Him.
Thanks for listening to I Retire for Him with your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg, and Retirement Reformation founder, Bruce Bruinsma. I Retire for Him is the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Most Christians tend to follow the world's pattern of rest and self-pampering during retirement. However, in your retirement, you can be focused on God's unique call to love, serve, and help others. This can be your best season of life if you take advantage of a life's worth of knowledge and experience and combine it with a greater freedom of time and money and invest it all in the generations both preceding and following you. The Retirement Reformation is encouraging Christians to find and follow God's call in all seasons and aspects of life, especially in retirement. Take time to sign the manifesto at retirementreformation.org and explore the wealth of resources available on our site. Join this movement of God and journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Go to retirementreformation.org.